We are now live and recording.
Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, May 25th, 2023. This is a special meeting of the Darien Board of Education's Curriculum Committee. Our job today is to look at the role of the department chair and to better understand what these positions add to our district. So I will turn it over to Dr. Schomburg.
Good morning. It's good to see everyone. Before we jump into the presentation on department chairs, I just want to draw everyone's attention to the memo. It does a look ahead to what's coming for our June meeting, which the same distinguished panel that you have with you today will be back to discuss the 8th grade to 9th grade transition and what those courses look like and some potential requests for changes that we might see through the course change process in the fall. Additionally, just an update, which is a non-update of sorts on literacy. We did submit our waiver on February 28th. Darien Public Schools, along with 90 other school districts across the state, did submit a waiver. And that's 90 out of 160, just so you have a context of about how many districts are requesting to continue with a different program than what the state is suggesting. Additionally, because the state was so overwhelmed with the number of waivers they received, they decided to partially outsource the review process. So they are working with an external company. The earliest we would hear is mid-June, if I'm correct, but probably not until later in the summer, which just for context is making things a bit complicated because we additionally received allocation for a reading grant. Every district received an allocation. Ours is about $148,000 over 2 years, which isn't insignificant, but that request has to be in before you will necessarily hear whether or not you've received a waiver, if you've received the waiver, which could change the course of how you might want to spend those dollars. So more to come on that, but that's where we are.
Interesting. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. Chris, just any idea what the tea leaves are saying?
Depends on the day. And we have very good relationships with our State Department, and no, there's no clear.
I guess I would just ask, as we move into June and then July and then August and wait to hear anything, if we can just keep the board as informed as possible, so that should we find out August or September that we need to implement an entirely new curriculum by September of the following year, we're not surprised by the sudden need for excess resources and diverting resources, et cetera. Just to stay on top of it as we are, but thank you.
So they say that it's June, but I'd be pleasantly surprised if that's the case, but we'll see.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. And we'll move on to the presentation for today.
Tara has a question.
I thought there was a grace period.
So the grace period is if the waiver is not granted, you'll have another year before you have to implement. So, and it's likely that it's not just another year, that it will be 2 years before implementation. If the current legislation that's sitting a bit in limbo right now, it might be hanging out to wait for the results on the waiver.
So we might be looking at 2025.
Yeah. Worst case scenario, it's September 2024.
Yes, that's worst case scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, quick question. If we do not get granted a waiver, don't we have to do the state plan off the shelf curriculum, or are we developing a new one from scratch?
There are 7 curricula that the district will have to choose from specifically for K-3.
Thank you.
Okay, and Michelle, if we can have the slides for today.
Could I just for the clarity, good morning to everybody again. I just want to welcome my colleagues. My understanding of this morning is, or our understanding of preparing this, was to give an overview of department responsibilities and how they work, and also to prepare for a board presentation on the same, and to gender questions and things that we want brought to the full board on this matter.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think from where I sit, this is a chance for us to better understand what you all do, and how you contribute to teachers, to students, to administration, how everybody works together. And then I think going forward, it's is there opportunity for any adjustments to this role that would be more efficient, effective, whatever. So I think yeah, I'm grateful that you all are here to share more details of what you actually do all day, because I think that's helpful for everybody to know.
So welcome to everyone. I won't talk too much to set this up, but this is just an overview of what we will be looking at today. This is an incredibly talented group of educators who together, the 5 of them, represent 85 years of experience in Darien alone. It doesn't even include where they may have been otherwise. So there's a lot of historical knowledge that they can provide today. As always, just making a connection to our mission and vision. One of the important roles of a department chair, it's a challenging role that I had as well. It's when you lead from the middle, you have people all around you that not only you're trying to support and help, but are also trying to tell you how to do your job. But the ultimate job of a department chair is to really help clear the way so teachers can maximize their time and be as effective with students as possible. This is just our visual model of the 3 buckets of the department chair. So we broke it into teaching and learning, students and families, and supervision and evaluation. I made a reference to the book Switch. Switch was one of the resources we used as a team during the pandemic. It's not an education book, but it is a really important resource on change leadership. The little subtitle is how to change things when change is hard. Change is hard, and it's also not the favorite thing of educators. And even though it's not our favorite thing, it happens all of the time. And one of the big things that has changed over time is we talk about how students are different. And we really talk about how students are different post the pandemic. So this resource helped us get it through. The basic framework of this book is really looking at how do we appeal to the logical minds of people, the creative minds of people, and also shape the paths to get the work done. And that's the challenge of being in the department chair is, yes, there's logic and we have to get the stuff done, but there's a lot of emotionality that comes with working with a group of people who not only have a profession of education, but deeply care about what they do. And it's personal. It's very hard to separate how I personally feel about my job as an educator and the work that I'm actually doing. So this, I just wanted to point that out because I endorse Switch wherever I go, because I think it's an important resource that's useful across all disciplines. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trenberg. So we want to start by giving a sense of how this position has changed and evolved over the years. To start, the position that preceded what we are currently doing as 6 through 12 department chairs was in a school-specific 6 through 8 or 9 through 12 department coordinator. It was largely a teaching position with some administrative duties attached to it. I was hired in 2004, and that was the model that we had. That model precedes that time by a good number of years as well. In that window of time, the school has changed a lot. And there was this movement to the 6 through 12 position, which is a position that really supports students and supports teachers in a way that I think you'll be able to see as we kind of go through our presentation today, the different ways we've been able to do that. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about that first line on here about articulation and what that looks like. So when I was hired in 2004, from that point up until the 6 through 12 positions were created, we only had an opportunity to have one middle school social studies and high school social studies combined meeting. There was, the way that the schools each thought of it was that they were very isolated, they were separate and distinct, and the contact between them was minimal at best. Since that time, since we have created this 6 through 12 position, now we have a much clearer sense of what happens at the grades above and below where we're teaching, which ultimately is going to have a great benefit to our students because they're going to have a clearer scope and sequence of the content and skills that they work on. This comes through as an example with like the professional development that we do regularly. I'll have groups of teachers work together during professional development sessions, and I'll have them vertically grouped. So I'll have a teacher that represents each of the grades from 6 through 12. And we might do things like bring in a writing assignment that you've given that you're really proud of, that you want to share with your colleagues, bring in a sample of student work, bring in a recent reading that you gave to your students. And this gives us an opportunity to learn not only about what content are you covering, but what's the level of depth of understanding? What's the challenge level look like? What skills are we asking students to develop at the younger grades so that if you teach older grades, you know this is the foundation my students should be coming in with. And if you teach the younger grades, you have a clear sense of what the expectations will be and where you need to get your students to so that they're ready for it. We see this as being a huge benefit. On top of that, we also have the opportunity to work with our counterpart at the elementary level, Julie Droller, and also have had some opportunities to have even middle school and elementary school teachers work together at times as well. So it gives a clearer sense of what's going on in our department. And that's been a real help, I think, to having a clear scope and sequence of what students should expect as they go through their schooling year.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up from where Keith left off. I've had the unique experience of having worked in this district for over 30 years, and I've experienced this school, this district as a teacher, primarily as a department coordinator, and then as a department chair. So I can speak to the previous role as far as supervision and evaluation, and the differences between the two models. When I started here, the school was very different. The graduating senior class was 187. There were no computers and there was a graphing calculator was new, really new. The needs of the school now are different. At that time, the primary evaluator was the building level principal or assistant principal. And they may or may not have been from the discipline that you were teaching. So in my case, I can only remember one occasion where in the classroom, it was an Algebra 1 class, I received content-specific feedback from my evaluator. The principal happened to be a former math teacher. He was observing an Algebra 1 lesson, and he gave me specific feedback about teaching factoring and solving factoring equations and having the students pair up and FOIL first. I remember it. That was in the old building. It was a long time ago because it was one of the most infrequent times that I did receive content-specific feedback about my teaching. So the previous role is department coordinator. When I took over that role, and that was the model that was prior to 2017, was primarily a teaching role. There was a 0.2 release time. And during that time, you could order books, create a schedule, act somewhat as a liaison between the students, the teachers, and the administration. But there was no supervisory or evaluative component to it. And the current role now in 2017, we're able to provide targeted, actionable feedback to the teachers in our discipline, in our content area, and that ultimately makes an impact on student learning and helps teachers grow. So that's.
So I'm going to talk about is my mic on? I'm going to talk about the last point, the shift from the previous role being a teaching role that supported building administration to now an administrative role that supports teachers and students. The previous role of curriculum coordinator was primarily a teaching role, as the primary function of the person in that role was to teach. The curriculum coordinator supported building administration in the sense that we, and I say we because 3 of us sitting here previously held the coordinator role, in addition to teaching, did several management tasks, such as ordering supplies, helping design the schedule, and fielding parent phone calls, among other things. But now, as department chairs, we not only continue to support our building administrators in the day-to-day functioning of our schools, but we have a much more active hands-on role in our departments and in the instruction that happens in our classrooms. We support our colleagues to perfect their craft as teachers. Because we're in those rooms, we're attuned to students' needs and interests within our content areas, because as Mr. Keeler said, we know their trajectory inside and out, grades K through 12, and across middle and high school. And we'll get a little bit more in the weeds with this once we talk about in the coming slides when we describe our roles in detail.
Okay, excuse me. I'm going to provide a little bit more context before we get to what we actually do on a daily basis. When we look at the evolution of the role, one thing to remember is that the previous model was in place as far back as the early 1990s, as Felicia was mentioning a minute ago. And its responsibilities made sense at that time when student enrollments at both schools were a lot lower than they are today. I began teaching at Darien High School in 2003. So currently, if you can go to the DHS enrollment trends, you can see that where I came in, the enrollment at the high school was 957 students, okay? I'll just say that today you can see that we are always typically over 1,400, so that's about a 50% increase from what I came in with. And if you were to pull those back and bring that back into the 1990s, you would see for both schools that the populations were a lot closer to 700 than even the 800 and 900 that you see in the early stages of the enrollment. So the coordinator position was in place for those years, and it made sense. And how that might play out, I'll give you an example. When I first started my early years, if we needed to have a grade level meeting, that meant I worked with a partner, or in some cases, we had a group of 3. We could do it informally. It was not that difficult to pull that group together. Today, when I have grade level groups for English 9, English 10, grade 11 American Studies, that requires that I coordinate the schedules for between 5 and 7 teachers. And with our schedule right now, it's doable and it happens a lot, but it's something that is more complicated to do these days. That increase in enrollment has also posed challenges for our building-based administrators. As the number of students and teachers has grown, that has meant larger numbers of student meetings, PPTs, teacher evaluations, and a host of other meetings and responsibilities, as you can imagine. To help address a growing need for supervisory and evaluative capabilities, our roles evolved to include those responsibilities. And even since we started in 2017, our roles have evolved so that we now take the lead when it comes to hiring, when it comes to teaching evaluation, when it comes to the goal meetings that we have with teachers throughout the year. And by doing this, okay, obviously, this is supporting our building-based admin team colleagues. But more importantly, when we take the lead in hiring, teacher eval, goal setting, all of those things, our teachers benefit because we are bringing content expertise to that arena and to those meetings.
Is this perfect? There's no on button on this one. Sorry. So one of our, from the beginning of this position, one of our key roles was to look at and further develop the curriculum across our content areas. These curriculum positions has been a critical focus for us, and we use the Understanding by Design, or UBD, process to create curriculum that is aligned and provides equitable and rigorous experiences across our classrooms. Understanding by Design, or UBD, as it's affectionately known, is a curriculum planning framework that purposely focuses on helping students see the big ideas and big picture understandings within a course. Ultimately, the goal is to provide a curriculum that allows them to transfer those understandings to their environments outside of the classroom. In our development process, there are 3 stages within this framework, and the design process allows for educators to be continuously checking for alignment and make the necessary adjustments based on who's in their classroom. The first and second stages of this UBD process are designed by teachers and are utilized by the teachers. The first step in the process is to determine the desired results for each of the curricular units. In most cases, these desired results are based on our national, state, or local seal and content standards. In addition, We've also been integrating our local district vision of the graduate competencies and our departmental transfer goals into this first stage of the desired results. Our second stage focuses on the assessment of those desired results. The key question here is how, as educators, do we know that the students are meeting the goals that we've laid out in that first stage? That may look like a performance task. That may look like how the assessments are being shifted to meet the needs of the students, but it's really looking at how we measure the growth of our students from unit to unit. Lastly, stage 3 is designed by our teachers, and this is where sort of the rubber hits the road in the classroom. This is where we design what happens in our classroom and focus on the students. The learning sequence, as design 3 is known, identifies a flexible framework of assured experiences that will be used by the teachers to support students along this path towards meeting those desired results. It is our charge as department chairs to lead this process, work with teachers to ensure that those 3 stages are aligned, and then look at the horizontal coherence from unit to unit, but also the vertical alignment, as Keith mentioned, from level to level. So from grade level to grade level and from school to school. This curriculum or this alignment is really the foundation of our curriculum work. Just to highlight some benefits here, a completed unit of study provides teachers with a clearly articulated set of learning objectives, a sequential progression of skill and content, and the opportunities to develop those learning activities and focus on what the students are doing in the classroom and make sure it's aligned to those clearly laid out learning goals. For our students, curricular units completed using the UBD process provide clear learning objectives and understanding and opportunities to develop and deepen their learning and understanding of those key ideas. A question was asked about how much our curriculum changes from year to year. And in reality, there are changes, but stage 1, which focuses on those desired results, is basically laid out by our standards and the goals of the district. So very little will change in terms of our goals for our students. Year to year, there may be slight changes as to how teachers assess those desired results based on the assessment that is created or assessments that are created. So there may be changes, slightly informative assessments or changes in the content that the assessment may be based on, but the desired results have to be aligned with those assessments to make sure we have an understanding of how our students are doing towards meeting those goals. Where we may see some more significant changes year to year is in that learning sequence. And that may look like a new piece of content or a new phenomenon being used within that unit that may be more relevant to students or may have changed based on teacher experience or having a new teacher come in and bringing in some new activities or lessons that may relate more to what's happening in those units. So for example, 9th grade biology this year is just working through their evolution and natural selection unit. In the past, the basis of that unit has been looking at the rock pocket mice and looking at how changes in their environment has resulted in changes in the fur of the mice and relating that back to genetics and natural selection and evolutionary processes. This year, our teachers have worked together to introduce a new phenomena looking at the junco, which is a bird that has shifted their migrations, their behaviors, and the color of their plumage over a matter of decades due to habitat and environmental changes. So the learning sequence may be where we see the most change year to year, but really stage 1 and stage 2 are quite similar throughout a year. So we changed our biology curriculum in 2019. We still have the same desired results, the same goals, but the assessment and the learning sequences may shift to address student needs. It certainly takes a while for us to get through these units and work with our teachers to implement this UBD process and shift their thinking from we want to do these great experiences in the classroom to really focusing on what we want our students to walk out of that unit or what we want our students to walk out of that year learning. So at the beginning of this process, it's more time intensive and labor intensive, but certainly we've seen shifts in the amount of time and the quality of those units as our teachers have become more familiarized with this process.
So ensuring vertical alignment K-12 and supporting district, school, and department goals is not possible without professional development for teachers. For us as department chairs, this means designing PD within our content areas that furthers our department goals, building goals, and individual teacher goals, which Dr. Bells will speak about in a minute. A recent example of this is DHS's goal of perfecting lesson and unit design within the context of our block schedule. It's something that we've been working on in that building for the past 2 years. As department chairs, we've done a significant amount of work in this area with our colleagues directly, particularly through our established PLC process, as well as individual time with our colleagues looking at lessons and unit plans, and then seeing those lessons and unit plans come to life in the classroom. The professional development we provide is as large as a K-12 meeting of all the teachers in our content area, or a group that, as Christian mentioned, is working on designing a unit within the context of the UBD framework, or as small as a one-on-one coaching or debriefing session with a colleague after sitting in on one of their lessons. So our professional development, it's a broad term because the work that we do in this area is very broad, but it's also very deep.
So one of the key pieces of work that we do is lead the hiring department for our hiring process for each of our departments. And I want to be clear that this process starts when a position opens, and our HR department will post that position on CT REAP and on our district website and other locations where we post our vacancies. Once that vacancy starts, that's where we step in and start this process and start leading this process. Before I get to that, I do want to just touch upon our current climate in terms of teachers and teacher vacancies. Each year, the U.S. Department of Education publishes an annual report called The Condition of Education. Part of this report tracks teacher vacancies and turnover rates. This report has consistently shown an increase in both of these metrics over the past couple years. These trends mirror what we as department chairs have been seeing and experiencing here in Darien as well. There is nothing more critical for our student success than the person that's sitting in the room with them, thus highlighting for us the importance of this process and our role in this process. As the point person for this process, once the vacancy has been announced, I'd like to lay out sort of our goals of each step within the slide that we have in front of us. So once a position is posted, we start reviewing applicants that have applied. So that looks like reading resumes, looking at the cover letters, reading through the applications. So for example, that can be anywhere from 10 to 20 pages of information on a prospective candidate. So we go through every single one of those applications that come in and ensure that what we're looking for and highlight what we're looking for in those applications. In addition, as we know, the current climate, we've also spent a vast amount of time actively searching for highly qualified candidates, whether that's looking at CT REAP or looking at OLAS and highlighting candidates who may not have applied for our position, but do have the qualities or do have the expertise on paper that might fill the roles that we are looking for. So once that process ends, we identify the candidates that we would like to sort of introduce ourselves to and get to know a little bit. And that takes us to our second step, which is the screening process, where we coordinate and lead the screening interviews. So those interviews can last anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes per candidate. For example, in a recent position that I worked on, we had 8 screening interviews over the course of a day and a half. The coordination in terms of preparing for those, each interview has a department chair and a building-based administrator, ideally. So we coordinate with the building-based administrator to walk through that interview process. And it consists of 4 to 6 questions to get a basic understanding of the beliefs and the experience of that particular candidate. Once those screening interviews have been completed, we make some assessments about which of those we may want to invite to the next step of the process. And that's where we focus on seeing them put their experience and their planning into practice in the classroom and provide a deeper or an opportunity to understand who they are as an educator in a deeper way. So the interview and demonstration lesson process is led by the department chairs as well. For those candidates that we are interested in, we'll set up those demonstration lessons and interviews. The coordination for those entails finding space and classrooms for the demonstration lessons, finding a learning objective for the teacher to plan out for that demonstration lesson, bringing that committee together, which entails about 3 or 4 teachers and a building level administrator in order to watch the demonstration lesson and the committee interview. So also as an ancillary, it's finding coverage for those teachers who have volunteered to be part of that demonstration lesson and interview committee. So those pieces all lead to highlighting a final set of candidates in terms of who we are making a recommendation for to fill that position. Once we have that final set, we start reaching out to districts, highlighting and making reference checks, coordinating final building level interviews so that the principal has an opportunity, if they have not yet had an opportunity to meet that candidate, and then making final submissions of documentation, references, college transcripts, everything that is needed for that final recommendation to Dr. Adley and the final interview at central office. So the process varies depending on the number of candidates, the time of year, what certifications are necessary, which is a particularly big issue for me in science. But we could see probably a good average or an average time about 3 to 4 weeks to go from that initial screening interview until we have a candidate who has been hired in Dr. Adley's office and the offer has been made by the district. That single process may also include anywhere from 30 to 40 hours of work for a department chair to go through it and coordinate and organize every single one of those steps. And that's just to the point where we have a candidate who has been offered a position, right? That's when HR comes back in and starts to lay the groundwork in terms of the offer and the benefits, et cetera. And then ultimately we are handed that candidate back, where it is our next goal to onboard them and make sure that they are ready to be in the classroom and ready to meet the needs of our students on day one. So that's really an important piece and I think a really good overview of the work that we do to ensure that the people in our classrooms are of the highest quality and can meet the needs of our students most effectively.
Just a quick question. Is that, so that's the permanent teacher. Is the difference to hire long-term subs? How does that vary?
So usually in terms of a long-term sub, the process is essentially the same. I will say that there are some different complications in doing that, but there's usually less applicants. And the time crunch on that is usually a much shorter, in terms of filling that need, it's a much shorter time to get that done. So it may be we have 2 applicants that meet the needs of the students, and it's figuring out which one is going to best meet those needs. There's also an added complication of if there is a long-term sub or a middle of the year hire, that district that the teacher is coming from would also hold that teacher. So for example, in science this year, we had a teacher leave in 6th grade to go to a different district. We were able to hire within 3 weeks of the teacher leaving, but that left us with 3 weeks to try to organize coverage for the classes because her district had the contractual obligation or had the right to hold her for 30 days once she put in her resignation. So it also entails organizing coverage during the year, making sure that the curriculum is being taught and being aligned and with the courses where we have regular teachers and really making sure that that coverage is consistent throughout the time to best keep our students up to speed with their peers.
Are you involved in any of the daily sub hire or filling those positions or no?
In not filling them in terms of hiring, but certainly at times we are asked or we volunteer to help. If I know that at the high school we have a block 3 coverage need, I look up like which of our teachers might have block 3 off and make some direct requests for that coverage, but we're not involved with the day-to-day substitute hiring.
Thanks.
Yep.
And so I'm going to pick up in our next kind of bucket of supervision and evaluation, where Christian left off talking about onboarding. And I'll just for a moment say that, particularly with the kind of looking back quickly with the long-term subs, many times those are unforeseen. It's not something that we can plan for before it becomes necessary. And teachers have been really tremendous in stepping in to fill the need in that period of time between the moment we know we need it to the point we get a long-term sub in there. And that's been, I guess, just wanted to acknowledge that because that's makes a huge difference for our students. And it's incredibly helpful. So Christian left off with hiring. Once we have hired someone, now we have to get this person acclimated to teaching here in Darien, and that's a big part of what we do. When they're the very first few days that they're with us, a lot of what we're doing to help them is helping them to troubleshoot and get them up and running on all of the different systems that we use, all of their logins, getting them access to any of the resources that we have. It can sometimes take a while to get them used to all of the new systems and all of the different sites that they may have to access just for their regular teaching responsibilities. What we also try to do is to get them acclimated to what it's like to teach in this district. This is a unique place in many ways. And I'll give maybe this example that I often share with new teachers. When we go through the interview process, I'll often hear teachers talk about the importance of classroom management. Absolutely, it is important. But what I oftentimes tell them is the best form of classroom management here is coming in with a really good lesson plan. We have students who are really, really interested, really engaged. So if you meet them with something that's compelling, interesting, important, you come into class with a sense of purpose, they're really going to respond well to that. And many of those classroom management issues may be resolved. Certainly, that's not to say that we don't do more with classroom management, but pieces of advice like that, helping teachers to see that is part of what we're doing. We also help them with what I'll call like the landmarks of the year, the big events that take place that may be new to them, the open house or parent night. It may be getting your quarter grades that you've been entering all along into Aspen to roll over into the transcript portal so you can post that. It's little things, but it can, for someone who hasn't done it before, it can be a challenge to do. So we work to make sure that they're able to do that. And most importantly, we work with new teachers to the district on things like pacing, planning, grading, the quality of the feedback they're giving to students, and as needed, the lesson structure or level of challenge. We do this by visiting their classes regularly, meeting with them regularly, making sure that they're in contact with their teaching partners that are teaching the same courses. This is one of the things that we we spend a lot of time hiring, as Mr. Dockham kind of pointed out, and we want to do our best to advance teachers, to get them up to speed. And it's really one of the things that I think we find very enjoyable to do as well, because we're able to put the expertise that Dr. Tramberg had mentioned before to good use in, you know, what our experiences have been in the district, what works well, what we can see well working in our departments, and share that with our new hires.
Okay, so I'm going to follow up a little bit from what Keith said and talk about the supervision and evaluation piece again. And just as a comparison from our previous role, previously we did not supervise or evaluate any teachers. And in the current role, we not only supervise teachers in the high school, but in the middle school as well. So approximately collectively, the five of us have we're about 153 teachers that we are the primary evaluators for. And I'll explain what the primary evaluation piece is. And for me, it's 31 teachers in Middlesex and Darien High School. So it's all the math teachers in both schools, which is important. So as a primary evaluator, we are responsible for the informal and formal observations for all our teachers. For some teachers, it may mean one observation. For newer teachers, and you could see from the previous slide, there were in the last 6 years, 90 teachers that were hired between us that came and went. So for new teachers, it requires 2 to 3 evaluations. And we share that with the secondary evaluator, but we are the primary evaluators in terms of doing 1 or 2 of those observations. Every observation is followed up by a post-conference with the teacher. And the important difference is that we are the content specialists. So we know and see things differently. In math, you're going to see the way things are taught in a different way than a building administrator who is not a math expert may see things. And our goal is to act also as an instructional coach. It's not just as supervision, but it's to support teachers, especially the new teachers or people new to the district, and to provide the feedback that makes them better, that improves their practice. When there is a need for a teacher to be on a corrective assistance plan or a corrective supportive plan, that entails more observations. So that may be a 10-week plan that would require weekly or biweekly observations as well. A second component to this is the goal setting. As primary evaluators, we hold the goal meetings for all of the teachers in our department, and we also hold the mid-year meetings and the end of the year meetings. And so goal meetings are where teachers set goals for the year, and they integrate the strategic plan, the vision of the graduate, the building level goals. They set teacher practice goals, student learning outcome goals, whole school goals, and parent feedback goals. So there are 4 goals. We primarily work with the teachers for the teacher practice goal and the student outcome goals, but that's part of the process as well. So those meetings carry on. Teachers provide evidence of their growth throughout the year, and that's another piece to the evaluation process. Okay, I guess. Yeah, and I guess I would say that, like, a shout out to the teachers again. When they were talking about the coverage, I can't tell you how important the teachers stepping in to cover classes, to keep the curriculum moving forward and doing it, you know, for the best interest of the students, but also as a department as a whole. The culture we've built as department heads, when we ask, we're like, oh, you know, like so-and-so has a problem and there's been a death in the family, they just step right in. And that's the intangible that you can't really quantify in terms of the roles. So that's just a side note off script.
So we started the presentation by stating the 3 main areas into which we can divide our work, but none is more important than how we work directly with students and families. Primarily, we act as a liaison between parents, students, and teachers within the context of our content areas on topics such as courses, resources, grades, honor societies, and extracurricular opportunities, just to name a few. As Mr. Keeler mentioned earlier, there are not only landmarks in the school year for students, but these landmark moments also exist for us and for our teacher colleagues with regards to courses that students can take in our departments. This is particularly important when we think about how our deep understanding of our courses and their content ensures a smooth transition from 5th to 6th grade, and again, from 8th to 9th grade in our departments, whether that means, in my case, switching a language, advancing in math, or taking an honors course. We also propose new courses based on department needs and student interest. And each year, as you all know, we present to families of rising 6th graders, rising 9th graders, conduct an elective expo at the high school, and also share our individual department chair update presentations to the Board of Ed Curriculum Committee. These presentations are often the first time families hear about how individual classes fit within the larger context of a student's schedule, and oftentimes the first time families are able to put a face to a name when they meet us at one of those meetings.
So picking up on what Christina just said, I have personally had many conversations with parents who are very thankful to learn from me the ins and outs of our English classes, especially the high school English classes, and especially for those parents whose oldest students were enrolling at DHS for the very first time. When it comes to making course placements and course adjustments, there are a couple things that I think are worth emphasizing. First, as you all know, we put in practice a comprehensive waiver form procedure just last year. And what that does is it provides a much greater level of access to our advanced classes for all of our students. Now, providing that access to our advanced classes is something that we are all very passionate about, and we support tremendously. And I think it's something that should be known that the department chairs really led the effort to put the waiver system in place. Second, you should know that whenever a student decides to either level down out of an advanced class, which happens a lot, or to use the waiver to access one of the advanced courses, which happens a lot, either one of those procedures ultimately requires that they meet directly with one of us. And that meeting is critical because we use it to get to know the student. We get to know their interests, their motivations, their skills, experience. We ask them about their schedule so we can see what sort of other courses that this course might be competing with. We ask about extracurriculars so we have a sense of the time that they can put into it. We also look at student performance data so that we can compare how other students with similar data profiles have done in the class and share that with the student. We talk about what the key elements of that class are, the key assignments, the key projects, the major readings that they're going to have to do in some cases. And we share with that student what it's going to take to be successful in that class. Now, we also sign the form, but the meeting is what's important. And these are not quick meetings, okay? But they are very important meetings because our goal in having this meeting is to ensure that all students are put in a position to make the best decision possible for the courses they elect to take, right? It's a critical step, and it's something that we devote a great deal of time to over the course of the year.
So there's nothing more important than the students and families in this district. And as department chairs, one of our roles is to support all students. And we have students with varying needs. We have students that are new from other countries, from other states. This past year, 62 students were switched into, were new to the district in Middlesex. So we work closely with the parents and families to place their students in the appropriate courses and review their files. But we also look to support students that are international with English language learners as far as connecting them to resources that they may need. We've had translate exams into their primary languages. We've ordered books in different languages for those students and connected them to the appropriate people and resources that are needed. As far as special education goes, we work very collaboratively with the special education department to make sure that we're accommodating the needs of the students and that our teachers are meeting the IEPs in a way that that complements the special education department. For example, we have co-teaching models, we have team taught, which is a regular ed intervention, and we also have a lab supported model. The co-teaching model with the special ed department, we have planned professional development opportunities. We have, as department chairs, modeled with the department chair of the special ed department and modeled lessons for the teachers. We have engaged in parallel teaching, station teaching. We've done a number of things just to provide more access for students and more ways to differentiate instruction for them. So that's been a big part of our work with the special ed department. And as far as resources go, also, I just, as a quick example, the math department, we have a shared drive where we share resources, but we have one folder that's been created in the last 6 years, which is resources for students with disabilities. And in that folder, we have like strategies for working with students with math, with dyslexia in math, because it's content specific. A student in geometry with dyslexia is going to have some issues with drawing the diagrams and labeling the diagrams. And so we have a resource folder that we add to and change and share every year for strategies to meet the needs of the students. So that's just a quick example of that.
Dr. Tranberg said it well. Sorry, Dr. Tranberg said it well before that we, in our department chair positions, lead from the middle. And I think this slide tries to get at that a little bit by showing all the different groups that we're a part of, all of the different the interactions that we have, whether they be at the school level or at the teacher level or at the state or district level. So within the schools, we participate in faculty meetings, and just like any member of the faculty would, we also are involved with the building level administrators and work closely with them as a leadership team at both Middlesex and at DHS. We also work in PLCs at both MMS and in DHS. Beyond working in the schools, we have all of those teacher meetings that we talked about before, whether they be part of the formal observation process or part of the informal talking about our classes, talking about students, and trying to help teachers navigate that. But we're also involved at the state and district level. And so we're part of the administrative leadership team for the district. We have Middlesex and DHS combined leadership meetings and secondary meetings. We meet as a curriculum team to give shape to the work that we do in the district. And then out in the district as well, we participate in groups like the PDEC, the Professional Development and Evaluation Committee, the DEI Committee. And our work also takes us outside of the town of Darien in that we participate in either regional or state level work. So as an example, I attend the CES regional social studies council meetings that happen periodically throughout the year. It's an opportunity for me to get state updates, to get a sense of what's happening. Is there new legislation? Is there an update on a timeline that, as we kind of seem to always hear, that it's delayed and when is it going to next come? But it helps me to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on outside of our district in terms of best practices and other movements within the state. Similarly, I participate and attend the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies meetings and workshops whenever they are available as well. And while that's specific to me, I think each of us do that in our own discipline specific way.
So in looking ahead, over the past year, you have heard a lot about EduPlanet 21, which is the curriculum warehousing digital platform that we are transitioning our curriculum to across the district. Now, Christian did a great job of talking about our curriculum development process and getting kind of granular, and I won't go there, but I want to talk about this transition to EduPlanet per se. We have all been leading teacher teams in making this transition. I would say we're very pleased by our early results. It started kind of slowly, but it's picking up steam at this point. I will say that on a personal level, that a couple of the experiences that I've had working with teacher teams have been highlights of my career doing this work. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done so far. Once the transition is complete, the result will be a greater level of curriculum transparency for parents, as well as a greater level of curriculum access, not only for the teachers of a particular course, but for the building-based administrators and teachers of other grade levels. There's going to be a lot more access to the curriculum by a lot of people. But the biggest beneficiaries of this transition are going to be our students. The platform requires that all courses and all units begin by determining standards-based student learning outcomes. We start with the outcomes and then we work backwards in developing the lessons, the activities, the assessments, and all the pieces that are going to go into a unit or a course in order to guarantee those outcomes. In addition to the national, state, and local standards that are emphasized in this process, our curriculum work with EduPlanet 21 requires that we select technology standards for our courses and our units. As we all know, technology continues to play a larger role in how our students learn and how they demonstrate that learning. And while we're on the subject of technology, it will come as no surprise that we have increasingly needed to provide support and guidance to our teachers to look for appropriate and meaningful ways to bring generative AI into the classroom. I'll just say on a personal level, it started slowly, and over the last couple of months, it feels like not a day has gone by that I haven't been impacted in some way through teachers, through students with some kind of experience that is connected to ChatGPT or generative AI. Based on our experience, we know that this will need to be a major point of emphasis for PD next year as its capabilities and our students' encounters with it are increasing by the day and to me, seemingly by the minute. Okay, so technology is going to play an even greater role in what we do going forward.
I just wanted to spend a quick moment highlighting the shifts in supervision and evaluation as we get more information from the state about the new supervision and evaluation program. I see or foresee our roles being more important in the implementation of that new supervision and evaluation process, as it really is shifting the focus away from teacher ratings and putting a 3 or a 4 on an informal observation to highlight the feedback and providing the opportunity for teachers to continuously grow and look for areas of improvement within their pedagogy. And so in order for us best to meet those needs and as a district, and in order for our teachers to get the most targeted, content specific and instructionally sound feedback on those lessons as part of this new evaluation system, I really foresee a much larger need in terms of our positions and being the point person on those on the implementation of that supervision and evaluation process for our district.
When does that new system, is it already in existence, or when does that get?
Next year, the Professional Development and Evaluation Committee, PDEC, will have to use the new state, maybe a framework is the best way to describe it, and create a completely new system that will heavily rely on a growth model of conversation and feedback, and much less on things that we've become used to, like student performance and student learning outcomes.
Okay, so I'm just thinking that
Thank you, Sarah. I'll have to watch the rest later. Appreciate this.
Thanks, Dave. I'm just thinking that the board likes metrics. It sounds like this is going to be even more difficult to have specific metrics. Is that accurate?
Definitely, because there's not going to be a scoring component. So yes, but it would, you're still going to have an idea of who receives tenure, who's continuing. That all of that information will be
It's gonna be
clear.
softer, right? Not as,
You can say softer because there's not scoring, but there's not scoring because the research doesn't support that scoring teachers was facilitating growth, especially rating teachers based on student performance. There's no correlation, and that's how models across the country not only were being developed to develop teacher evaluation systems, but also states that have teacher merit pay, which is actually where that model came from originally.
we're done. Okay. Discussion. Thank you all for this very thorough explanation of what happens in this role. I think I definitely learned stuff that I didn't know about. I think I'm going to play devil's advocate for a little bit. Some of the criticism, I don't know if that's the right word, that we hear about this department chair role is that the 5 of you are not in classrooms and maybe a little disconnected from the hands-on teaching. Can you speak to that a little bit? And I, initially when this role was presented, you were in the classroom for a period. That changed. Why did that change? Do you feel like it would be helpful for you to be in classroom? And I also understand there's some contractual issues with that as well. So
You're talking about the teaching component.
yes. So,
Okay, specifically,
yeah,
not
right.
like our
Teaching
being in
No,
classrooms with
you
teachers.
being in front of a class of children.
Who wants to do that?
I can take that one. So I don't think anyone would doubt that we love teaching. That's why we're here. I tell my friends that I loved high school so much that I never left. Right now, I've continued to work in one. So no one will doubt that we love teaching as a profession, that we love teachers as humans, and that we consider ourselves teachers as well. And given that now that we've transitioned into this role, we're in the classroom in another way. We're observing lessons. We're invited into our colleagues' classrooms and come and see this new thing that I'm doing. Give me some feedback on this new lesson that I'm trying out. And because of all of these things that we just described, these 3 buckets of work that we do, it is very challenging to then schedule us to be in front of a group of children. And we said here through the hiring process that the most important thing is the person that's in front of our students. And we cannot do this and also be the best possible teacher for the group of students that's in front of us, regardless of how big or small that group is. The responsibility of the role in order for us to be able to do everything that we do effectively would be at the detriment of the students that we would be responsible for. We've all, of all the teams in the Darien Public Schools, we have remained unchanged since our inception. The 5 of us have worked together collectively for 6 years since we were hired. And all of us have had, at one point, a established teaching responsibility in one of our schools, whether it be Middlesex or DHS, from a not just from a contractual standpoint, but from an HR standpoint. Putting us arbitrarily in one of those buildings means that someone else doesn't teach full time. It also means that in order to be able to attend all of the meetings that we attend, have the interaction with students that we need to have when those students are free, perhaps, means that we have to find coverage for the class of students that we would be responsible for. We've all experienced that. So it's not to say that, oh, hypothetically, we could be, we all were, and realized that it's, yes, I need to do all these things. And because of that, I need to find someone else to be in front of my students because I can't be in class that day. Or this year I'm at Middlesex, but next year I'm at DHS. The 2 don't really go hand in hand.
I'm going to also jump in for a moment. And I would argue and say that we are in the classroom in terms of teaching. When a teacher is put on a plan or needs support, we step in and teach the class to model it. When you know, that's a key part of it. And also going back to what Christina said about the teaching and not being there. When we worked under that model for 2 years, I believe it was, there was a schedule rotation. So we couldn't observe certain teachers because it conflicted with the class. So for example, I remember a time where there was a teacher, a particular class, a particular period that had a problem, but I was teaching that period. That was my class. So I could not intervene and go into that class and help. When there are teachers on plans, you need to be in the classroom, either modeling, observing, or observing other teachers with that teacher several times a week in order for the supportive plan to work. That can't happen if you're in the class, you know. So as much as, and I would say that after 30 plus years of teaching, I'm a teacher at first, and don't call me anything else other than a teacher, or say that I've lost my expertise in terms of what I do.
Thank you. I think that was helpful. I'll open up to other questions. Oh, Tara, sorry.
Hi, thank you. That was actually one of my questions as well. Obviously, we've all heard a lot of the same feedback. I'm kind of curious to piggyback on that. As an administration, have we done anything to reach out to teachers, an anonymous survey to see what they need, being that we have heard this feedback that they aren't being supported the way they should? Have we reached out and done a survey and found out what exactly they need?
We provide, after all professional development, Tara, we do give teachers a survey, and that's an anonymous survey that only asks for feedback on the day, but it also asks specifically, what do you need moving forward? And that feedback is provided to the full professional development and evaluation committee to review together. And one of the strengths of the new systems that are coming in through the legislation with the new teacher evaluation system is the role of the professional development and evaluation committee is more important, and the collaboration between the administrators union, the central office administration, and the teachers union is elevated. So that is a collaborative effort to make sure that teachers are receiving that support.
Great, thank you. I also wanted to jump over, and I'm sorry, but it's, you know, sorry, the presentation was very long and I'm trying to get questions in before I have to hop. Another thing, you know, jumping to the waiver. So what are the parameters around that? So any child can waive in, say they have, and I'm just going to use English just because it's just the top of my head. Say they have a D or a C in English, they can now waive into honors or AP. And I'm not talking about special education. I'm talking about just regular education student. And I know they're all regular education, but some kids don't have supports in place because they do not have PPTs, 504s. So I'm talking about that child who may be waiving in, not necessarily on their own accord. Maybe it's pressure from parents. Maybe they, you know, who knows? What do we do to support that child? And at what point do we say, you know what? You're taking away from the classroom because you need too much support and you should drop down.
So I'll speak to that, and I'll just say that going with a waiver system represents a philosophical shift, because up until this point, what we have been is we use criteria in every department to make our placements in our advanced courses. But ultimately, we were in the role of gatekeepers at some point to ensure that certain levels of performance students were not allowed into that course. And to just speak specifically about English, the criteria that we used, although I'm very confident in how we use it, there is I would say, a performance level of student that might be slightly below our criteria, that I would just say that I cannot say for certain if that student is going to be successful in that course, because we can't measure the determination and the heart and everything that goes into a student's performance in a given course. But so I will say, having gone through the process this year, and you heard me talk about the many meetings that we had with individual kids to try to get at the root of why they want to do this and how they're going to fare. I would say I'll just talk in terms of the students with me who went through the waiver process to go into 10 honors and our AP, grade 11 AP Lang class. I had roughly 50 students go through that process this year, and I met with all 50, and I would categorize it as about 45 or so were in that band where I can't say for certain that they're going to be successful at that level. But the way I frame it is you're going to be doing a lot more work. And based on the performance level and the metrics that I'm seeing, my guess is that it's going to be a lot of work for maybe a grade that's not to the level that you're accustomed to in your 300 level course that you've been taking. I would say that there were, and I'll just say, I'll speak for all of us in that sometimes you have to have frank conversations with students. And the waiver we're going to sign the waiver for the kids to give them access to the course. But I did very bluntly tell a very small number of kids that were far below the band that I'm talking about that I don't think this is a good decision. I don't think that the course is right for you. I enumerated why. And, ultimately I said, I'm going to support this through my signature, but this doesn't represent what I think is a good decision for you. And I think that this is ultimately going to end with you either being unsuccessful in the course or dropping back out of it. It's the best we can do. And I'll just say that once again, philosophically, this is a more positive conversation to have with the students so that they have agency and they have access to the course ultimately. And there will be learning that comes from being unsuccessful in the course, something that, I can't teach them by denying them that access.
If I can just add quickly that our teachers at the high school in collaboration with the director of guidance, the school counselors and us as department chairs, we set the stage for those course conversation days and really give our teachers an opportunity to have that first level of conversation with every student. So it has not been the case where we see a vast number of the students who you have described coming to us and waiving, because our teachers do such a great job explaining the expectations and laying out their rationales and their reasoning for making the initial recommendation for a particular course. So I really have to give credit to that process and the ability for our teachers to have some of those frank conversations on the front lines prior to a student coming to our office or reaching out to set up a conversation with us as department chairs.
One more thing, not to belabor this, but Tara, you asked about what happens to those waiver students once they actually are in the class that they waive into. I can speak for all of us in this respect. We keep records of not only the waivers that we receive, but also the conversations that we have with those students from year to year. So if an issue comes up, say Mr. Keeler comes into my office and says, I've got this situation with the student, can you help me? I will go back into my file and I'll say, is this a waiver student? Yes, let's see what they wrote on their form. Let me go back to my notes about our conversation. Did I talk to the student's parents? Let's look at who their teacher was last year, how they performed in the class last year. This was X student's teacher last year. Mr. Keeler, you should go and talk to them and see maybe what worked for that. Here's what I suggested to the student would be helpful to them once they were actually in the classroom. So that's a little bit of the nexus between coaching and professional development. It doesn't sound like it is, but it is. It's that granular. I had a conversation with the student. Here's what we talked about. I talked to their parents. Here's what I said would be helpful once that student was actually enrolled in the class. And here's how you can support them moving forward. I've also been in several situations last year and this year since the inception of the waiver where a student has waived into the class and I have suggested I will sit down with the student and with you, teacher of this student. Let's regroup and let's see what we can do moving forward. Because if the student's made a commitment to do the work in that class and has decided to challenge themselves, the last recourse is, I want to drop, this is too hard. It's really about supporting them once they're actually in there. And that's looking back historically to what happened the previous year, but also supporting them from the position of, I know the student, I know their family, I know their history and their trajectory through the department.
I guess, what does that support for that student really look like, though?
Well, it depends. Yeah, so it depends on that individual student. In my content area, it could be reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The student is saying, I'm having trouble understanding my teacher who's speaking 100% in Mandarin Chinese the whole time. It could also be, I really struggle with reading comprehension. Can you help me? So it really is individualized to that student's needs, but it's a conversation between me and the teacher, and sometimes me, the teacher, and the student. But it really is dependent on that individual student.
Thank you.
I'll also say that since the waivers were new last year, it was important to track the trends and look at what was going on. And so last year, I was able, every single student that had a waiver, we met with. And so I looked at the course they were coming from and the course they were going into. And then for every student that drops a course or changes their schedule, we also meet with them. So I was able to meet with those students and say, why, like, is it a particular course? Is it a particular teacher? Is it a particular situation? And just to ensure that there's not something that's, that it's a personal decision for the student and that it's not related to the way they're made to feel in the classroom or made to feel that they can't succeed in the class that they're trying. And most of the waiver students that waived into the class stayed, so that was a positive. That was really positive data. And I'm tracking it again this year. I think we all are.
Yeah, that's the most important through line through this that I don't want to lose, that the students who are waiving it are successful. And that is why there was the spirit behind this to make that change.
Yes.
When you have students, I know Francis used student agency, but the things we know from research is it's about student efficacy. If students have efficacy and believe they can, that's important. And the most important piece is the collective teacher efficacy. That's why teachers make a difference. When teachers believe the students in front of them can be successful, they're successful. That is a huge piece of it. And that's also why we don't have a list of these are waiver kids and these are not that we give to teachers. So when a teacher has a student in front of them, they're not labeling them as, oh, this is a waiver, this is someone who is recommended, because we want to believe that all students, no matter what, can be successful in the class that they're in. That's the job.
Thank you.
Julie.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'll try to be quick because I know we're running long, but thank you, everyone, for all the time and the amazing amount of information. Couple things that struck me during your presentation, some I was aware of and some I was just happy to hear discussion on. Content area expertise being so key. It's kind of obvious, but I think it's really valuable to drive that home as much as possible. Examples, et cetera, I think are great. Mr. Dockham, you gave a great description of understanding by design. I think it'd be wonderful to have a page on that. Just, I'm a visual learner, so that would have helped me. But that would be terrific. We talked a little about the feedback process. I think we could maybe even use an example. I think it'd be great to bring that to life a little better. And I'm talking not right now in our conversation, but as we move forward and you guys prepare to come to the full board. Sorry if I didn't set that up. I think there was some great granularity of process descriptions. We could probably scale some of that back for our next presentation. But I think it was super helpful to get into that amount of detail this morning. So thank you. One piece that I hadn't really thought about that I loved was there were a few examples of community and culture that I hadn't thought about. And for example, Mr. Keeler had the great example about classroom management, the approach of engagement rather than enforcement. I thought that was really nice and maybe very specific to Darien and the way you all are working together to make these things happen. The department operating as a department to support one another and jump in. And the curricular access, Mr. Janoska, that you mentioned about how EduPlanet allows teachers to look, a middle school teacher to see what that 10th grade lesson looks like and just have that perspective so easily available. I just think that was terrific. We touched on teaching a class or not teaching a class. Generally, I think, is it fair to say you all feel that you have enough exposure to students still, that you feel you're still relevant and you're still in touch with what's going on in the classroom? I think that's key. I mean, I definitely understand the challenges and sort of the chaos of, going to teach one middle school class this year, one high school class next year, and then I have to be in 18 other places all at the same time. I think that was very clear. And then one other thought was the Chat GPT and the generative AI. I'm just curious, thoughts on how discipline specific the ways to manage through this changing landscape might be in coming, I want to say years, but maybe it's more like weeks, days, months, the way things are moving at warp speed.
Is that something for later? Or
But
do you want?
to touch on it quickly? I'm happy to listen. I just
Well,
try to.
I just feel like I can't speak for my colleagues. We all have dealt with it to some extent, but I feel very personally connected at this point. Having had a meeting this morning about it and having a meeting tomorrow morning about it. You know, right now, the way I'm encountering it is that students in the writing process are skipping the writing process and submitting a final product that is derived from, say, ChatGPT. It's not particularly difficult to identify, but we're at a very nascent place in that the checkers that we can use to see if it was AI generated aren't robust enough for us to rely on, let's put it that way. So I'll just say for our department, what this is going to demand, I think there are three things that we're talking about, and I think these are crucial for us, and every department's going to have their own conversations about it. And one of which is that we're going to have to find a way to value the process of writing more than the final product. And that's going to be a really important conversation to have with all of our teachers. We are going to have to find ways to bring it into the class to demystify it. We have some of our teachers who have done that already in interesting ways to, do some prompt engineering and just to kind of show kids how it works and, compare some writing to what ChatGPT has been generating. And then the final thing is, at least on a humanities level, I'll just say that the ethical concerns that have been raised that we're all aware of with this technology as we move forward, I think we owe our students conversations about that in the classroom as well.
I had one last one that I think I missed, which is I would love to hear just a little more discussion about how the special education department chairs work with all of you when we come back to this topic again. Thank you.
So I think our job here this morning is to figure out next steps at this table. Like how does this discussion come to the full board? What is the discussion between or in front of the full board? And I guess the overarching thought, and this is not a slight in any way on the five of you. I think you all do a fabulous job at your jobs, and it's clear this morning, and you're all very passionate about it. But our job as a board is to figure out, are we using the most effective models, and are we doing what's right for our students and our staff? So the question is, how do we know this role is successful? How do we know this is the right model for our 6 to 12 academic subjects, departments? And I guess, I don't know if you can help me, or if Jill, if you want to hop in here and think about, Chris and Alan too, what is the next level of this conversation? And how do we roll this up to the full board?
Just want to speak first.
Go ahead, Joe. Seeing as you are 30,000 foot view human.
I would agree that is a little bit the next question, sort of how do we measure success? It's a little bit of the visionary side and it's a little bit of the measurement side, and we have to capture both. How do we know at the end of the day? And you've got some of that content in here, but I think it's the question. I think the next piece is what models do comparable districts use today? We did this in 2017. It'd be great to look and see what our fellow districts are doing so that we can answer the question of what we look like relative to others. I will agree with Julie that, and I'll speak just for a moment, I'm so happy the five of you are here. We have 7 department chairs. I think it's really important that we live what we believe. We have 7 department chairs. I'm in the red mood meter on that one. It's okay. Nobody's surprised that I feel passionately about that. I think when you come and talk about them, there might be some differences in the position. I'd love to understand if there's some administrative differences, if it functions a little differently. What is their curricular impact? You talked about the specific UBU lens that you're using. We've talked a lot in special ed about universal design for learning. How do those intersect? How do you work together? What does that look like? I think it's important to understand that curricular and instructional overlap. And that leads to coordination. What does that coordination look like? So that's another piece. And then I think it starts in your looking ahead, but what is the vision? What are the next steps for this position? And that ties very specifically to our goals and objectives and our strategic plan. I think it'd be great to see that coherence. You have it listed beautifully, but just to show that organizationally, we're all working together. That's what I would suggest would be sort of the outline for the next piece. I would toss it back to you guys, whether you want to see that happen here in the curricular committee meeting first, or whether you want to bring that directly to the board. But in my mind, listening to you, those are the next questions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, I don't know, to me, I wish all 9 of us were here sitting at, this is the problem with, or one of the issues that I personally have with the subcommittees, is there's so much great information at the subcommittees, and then rolling it up so all 9 of us fully understand what's happening is challenging. So the next meeting, I think it should be at the full board level, with an abridged, hopefully everybody will be watching this or will watch this, but with an abridged version, in addition to what we all just talked about, what Julie mentioned. And, how do we measure success of this role? Are there future changes that you would like to make this role more effective? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that was the intent of this particular meeting. Colleagues put it on the table, and whatever questions such as Jill just asked, and yourselves at the table, and Tara online, that if there were questions to be answered or shape the presentation a little bit differently, to go back to the board. I think that was the intent of this, to do the first flush here, add anything else to it that we need to add to it, and go back to the board with the presentation. I mean, I think honestly, from administration, I'm looking for, I'll certainly give contributions and suggestions, but I'm looking for the board. The board's asked me to look at these particular topics. Okay, so what is it we want to know about these topics? And we'll be more than delighted to actually put those on the table. So those types of questions are very helpful, because now we can go back and modify and address those particular matters.
I mean, I think the questions would be, how do we know this role is successful? How do we know this role is doing what we set out to do when we established it in 2017? Are there ways that this role could be improved? How does this tie into our strategic plan, our goals, our objectives? And again, just looking at other models of other districts and how, compare, we like to say we're the best at everything, but we may not be. Like, are there ways that we could improve upon what we're already doing?
One of the big talking points when these positions were created was to smooth out the transition from 8th to 9th grade. And I don't know how much we can try. I know it's been a weird couple of years, but to whatever degree we can point to better student experiences in that transition might be a nice piece to explore as well.
But if I can just put a plug in, that's, if you just recall our last meeting, that's something that will only get great results in my mind for some of us if we make some changes. So that's just something to make sure that we're all.
Yeah, and I think
recognizing the need,
those upcoming changes, I would assume, had a lot to do with your role becoming 612 and looking as a secondary level, not just the building. So I think that is very clearly a success of this role in my mind. But
So can I just add that the approach we took today was we really focused on the assets and what the role brings, because I understand the question of how do you know when something is successful? The only way you can really quantify it successful is if you don't have the thing.
Right.
So it's looking at the assets as these are all of the things that it brings. So the immediate answer to that is either we're not doing those things or someone else has to do them. So that's the very simple way to say it. I don't like that Jill's in the red, because I don't ever want anyone in the red, but you're allowed to be where you need to be. That's the rule of ruler. It was intentional today because those roles were covered in the special education design. So we can certainly bring it back in for the next one, but we didn't forget because we don't forget them and we work very closely all the time. So we'll certainly do some thinking about that, but this idea of evaluating what it brings, that's going to be hard to quantify if you're looking for numbers. So the numbers we included were the best that we could possibly do. And the thing that we couldn't quantify, and this idea of leading from the middle, is if you think about our chain of communication, These people are responding to more questions than anyone else. They are the first line of defense for teachers. They are the first people parents go to, and that they're ready to respond. And the reason that we don't hear a lot of the things we do is because of the people here. They are managing their departments well. The other piece, when we hear when people aren't happy, they're also bosses. So these are the first people that are holding teachers accountable for things that they might not want to do. So that's just perspective that it's important to have. And I know they really couldn't say it in theirs, but it's a tough job, especially for the several of them where teachers in the department and you become the boss of your peers. It's not easy. I did that too. So those are all just extra shout outs to them. These are 5 people that were in place when I got here. I cannot imagine working with 5 more talented people in these roles. They are truly exceptional educators, and it's just been an absolute honor of my career to work with them. So thank not only for today, but for the work they will continue to do.
Just on that, Chris, your point of if they don't do the work, it has to go elsewhere. You know, I think one of the questions that has been asked at the board table is kind of what is the work and then where does it go if it doesn't happen? So I think we should explicitly speak to that. I don't think that you have to spend, that could take a long time. I don't think we have to spend 2 months specifically allocating work, but I think it's important to talk about if we didn't have department chairs, what would that look like? And if department chairs taught a class, again, hearing what you're saying, but articulating that a little bit, what would that look like? Because the question has been asked, and I'd rather just answer it.
So the next question is, this initially was planned for our June, was it 12th meeting?
Yep.
Does that seem like it's an appropriate time? Do you, I mean,
So I would like to keep it going, to be honest with you.
you would like to keep it on the 12th?
Yeah. I will say just in general, this is a structure that serves, in my opinion, this is a structure that serves the district extremely well. It's one of the most efficient structures, actually, most helpful structures overall. We do have a strategic goal of building the professional capacity of the staff, and we can point to, they've shared today some of those things. The whole idea of curriculum and leadership around curriculum and teaching and learning is not getting any simpler. Contextually, even the times within which we live right now, even within our own district, topics of curriculum instruction and so on are even more prevalent. The disruptions that it would cause to the children that actually they would be teaching would have to be addressed, and it's been somewhat addressed here. So in addition to some of your things, I think we can, some things are tangential in nature, but I think we're comfortable enough to address the questions that are before us.
Okay. All right. Does that, are you all clear with? All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Anything else?
All right, now can I follow up with you and Chris if I think of anything?
Okay, sure. Okay, moving on to public comment. Our audience.
Good morning. If anyone on Zoom would like to participate, please use the raised hand option. There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.